the Jewish Channel's Week in Review. The Iran deal is here. Is it a good deal or a bad deal? Is a prenuptial agreement helping Orthodox women? And more of the Jewish news that's changing your world right now in this episode of the Week in Review. Hello and welcome to the Jewish Channel's Week in Review. I'm Stephen I. Weiss. The Iran nuclear deal is here. Is it a good deal or a bad deal, and will it prevent Iran from developing a nuclear weapon? In all likelihood, we won't know for years to come. The main goal of the deal is to make it very difficult for Iran to move toward nuclear weapons development without the West knowing about it, and without giving the West time to respond with clamping down on sanctions or a military invasion. In exchange, Iran gets staged reduction of sanctions over the next 10 years. To do so, Iran is expected to submit itself to inspections, reductions in its nuclear stockpile, and immobilizing various nuclear enrichment equipment. A key element in the design of the deal is its timing. Sanctions only get lifted in stages after inspectors confirm that Iran has done certain things to alter its nuclear program. The biggest of these is what the deal calls Implementation Day. Iran needs to take 39 specific steps relating to its various nuclear development facilities. After that inspection verification, money can flow relatively freely to Iran. People in the United States and the European Union will be able to send money directly there. Oil and gas sales can take place. Many other key measures of the Iranian sanctions come to an end. Further sanctions are to be removed on what is being called Transition Day. This will take place on the sooner of 8 years later, or when and if inspectors produce a report concluding, quote, that all nuclear material in Iran remains in peaceful activities. After 10 years, all remaining sanctions would be dropped. The biggest remaining question, of course, is if inspectors will gain the kind of access they need to verify that Iran has done all these things. The deal lays out a specific process for that. In Article 75, the deal states, if the International Atomic Energy Agency has concerns regarding undeclared nuclear materials or activities, the IAEA will provide Iran the basis for such concerns and request clarification. Then Article 76 says, if Iran's explanations do not resolve the IAEA's concerns, the agency may request access to such locations. Then Article 7 allows that Iran may propose to the IAEA alternative means of resolving the IAEA's concerns. If the IAEA's concerns aren't satisfied within 14 days of the IAEA's original request, the 8 members of the Joint Commission behind the deal vote on a resolution within 7 days. Is that enough to stop Iran from developing a nuclear weapon outside of Western inspections and surveillance? Time will tell. What is certain is that many of the deal's doubters are on record as saying Iran would be able to develop a bomb in a year's time if this deal would go through. In a year, we'll know whether those folks were correct or incorrect in their predictions. At the same time, while this deal will be evaluated based on whether or not a nuclear weapon in Iran results, there are 2 aspects of it that are worth keeping in mind. The first is that this deal was not developed in a vacuum. As much as preventing a nuclear Iran is a priority, there are other things world leaders want from Iran. Iran has played a major role in the ongoing slaughter in Syria, for example, and has been a major backer of Hamas. It is also key to fighting ISIS and maintaining some stability in Iraq. When the nuclear deal with Iran is presented as the best possible deal by those who negotiated it, it's important to keep in mind that what's possible for this deal isn't determined in a vacuum. The possibilities of this deal involve all the various levers Iran can pull, and that Western powers would prefer Iran not pull. If a nuclear Iran eventually develops, it will be those other aspects of deal-making with Iran that will come under a new light as well. And then there's Iran's role in world affairs. It's a role that's presented a fascinating question to global policy analysts ever since the 1979 revolution, but that has picked up the pace since the 2003 invasion of Iraq, which gave Iran a further toehold in the region and the incentive to create the kind of nuclear deterrent that would avoid their being displaced in the manner of Saddam Hussein. The administration of President Barack Obama has had a key but little-noticed shift of partnership and influence from powers that have dominated Middle East decision-making in the past couple decades, like Saudi Arabia, and toward Iran. There are many shifts within that larger change, such as a move from Sunni Muslim alliances to Shia Muslim alliances. This comes at a time when certain Sunni-affiliated groups have shown more openness towards Israel, particularly when it comes to reducing Shia influence. Saudi Arabia, the Palestinian Authority, and Egypt's military rule have been increasingly able to find common ground with Israel, at the same time as the U.S. has shifted to varying degrees away from all 3 and toward Iran. In that sense, this deal is about much more than just nuclear weapons, and the key issue to watch is whether those other matters are overtaking a nuclear weapon in perceived importance by U.S. and other Western leaders. Moving on to another question of delayed implementation of a deal, the situation affecting so-called chained wives, or agunot, stuck in Orthodox Jewish marriages because their husbands refuse to deliver a religious divorce, have some recourse in what's called the halachic prenuptial agreement. But how much recourse do they have? Rebecca Honig-Friedman investigates.
Rabbi Jeremy Stern is the executive director of the Organization for the Resolution of Agunot, or ORA, which works to resolve cases of what's called get refusal, when one spouse refuses to give the other the Orthodox Jewish divorce document known as a get. In the overwhelming majority of these cases, the recalcitrant spouse is the husband who refuses to give his wife a get, and the woman is what's known as an aguna, a chained wife, unable to remarry according to Orthodox Jewish law. In addition to resolving these cases, ORA spends a lot of its resources to raise awareness of what it calls the most effective solution to preventing future cases of get refusal, the halachic prenuptial agreement.
Just like everyone has a ketubah in a Jewish marriage, so too everyone should have a halachic prenup.
But just how effective is the halachic prenup at preventing get refusal and protecting women in the Orthodox Jewish divorce process? I spoke with those who work in the field to get their take, and with one woman who asked to remain anonymous, who's currently testing the boundaries of the halachic prenup in Israeli court, exposing a debate about what role the prenup should play in the divorce process and who gets to decide. There are different versions of the halachic prenup, but the most widely used in the United States is the mainstream Orthodox Beth Din of Americas. Rabbi Shlomo Weissman, the director of the Beit Din, or rabbinical court, calls the prenup the most important thing the Beth Din does in the area of divorce.
Essentially consists of two parts. It says that the Beth Din of America has jurisdiction to decide issues relating to the get, and it says that from the time the couple separates and anticipates the giving of a get until the end of their marriage under Jewish law, meaning until the get's given, the husband has to support his wife at the rate of $150 a day. And what that does is it puts teeth into the enforceability of our decisions under the prenup. It means that if ultimately the husband doesn't give a get, he's on the hook for that money. He has to pay, and he bears the consequences of his decision to remain married.
Weissman says the Beth Din of America handles about 300 cases a year of divorce and estimates that a significant 10 to 15% of those involve some level of contention regarding the giving of the get, but not when the couples have signed the prenup.
The prenup works so well and so elegantly that almost never do we actually have to get to the point where we're threatening or actually issuing a decision for monetary compensation.
But not everyone is quite so gung-ho as Stern and Weissman.
It's better than nothing because I think it creates a certain frame of mind of people going into a marriage. I think that it can be an effective tool to leverage the husband into giving the get, but I think it's being oversold.
Susan Aronoff has been fighting for Agunot for over 30 years and is the author of an upcoming book about her work, The Wedlocked Agunot. She's the founder, with the late Rivka Haut, of Aguna International. Aronoff would like to see a change to one particular clause in the current version of the prenup, which gives the Beit Din the sole power to decide when and if a recalcitrant husband should be required to pay his wife the spousal support specified in the prenup.
There are very few examples of women collecting the support money that is due them under the prenuptial. And there's no doubt in my mind that that's because the rabbis are in control of the ability of the women to collect.
TJC spoke with a woman who is trying to take that control back, suing her husband in Israeli court, even though no Beit Din ever invoked her prenup. Sarah, not her real name, says she has been in Aguna twice. A prior marriage had ended badly and left her fighting for a get for over 2 years. When she decided to remarry, she made sure to sign a halachic prenup.
I thought, I'm coming into a marriage. This is so respectful. I don't have to worry about being an aguna ever again. And it was a very healing experience for me at that moment.
But when their marriage fell apart just a few months later, Sarah says her nightmare started all over again when her husband, who was from Israel, returned there, and she ended up having to adjudicate her case in an Israeli Beit Din.
I waited 4.5 years. I only have my get because friends and strangers contributed to me financially to get me to Israel. And new laws changed in Israel that they are putting recalcitrant spouses in jail.
Stern, who would not comment on Sarah's specific case, said the prenup has always worked when its procedures have been followed correctly. But what does it mean for the prenup to work?
The purpose of the prenup is to get the get. And if a woman says, the prenup didn't work for me to get money from my husband, the answer is, that's right. The point of the prenup is not for you to get money from your husband. The point of the prenup is to eliminate the aguna crisis and to prevent get refusal.
And at bottom, that's where the major disagreement lies. Aronoff and women like Sarah argue that it shouldn't necessarily be an either-or proposition.
I think when a woman is held in limbo that way and emotionally abused in that way, because withholding the get is a form of domestic violence, that she should have the autonomy and the right, she should be empowered to make that decision herself. And in fact, I think she's entitled to the money and the get. It shouldn't be an either or, but that's up to the woman. It should be up to the woman.
Rabbi Weissman maintains, however, that there's an important reason that the decision to enforce the prenup be left in the Beit Din's hands.
A get needs to be given of a husband's own free will, and there are very complex laws governing what constitutes free will in the context of a get, what doesn't, what constitutes illicit coercion. And you really need a panel of experts. You really need a Beit Din who understands the rules that we're dealing with to grapple and to walk that fine line and ensure that the gittin that are given are appropriately given.
And a world in which every Jewish marriage uses a halachic prenup, even if it occasionally doesn't result in a get immediately, would be a vast improvement from the current reality, Stern imagines.
If we can resolve 99% of cases and then have to focus on that one, that's a huge step forward. And I feel it's doing agunot and the Jewish community a tremendous disservice to put down the prenup, to not do everything we can to try and standardize it. Let's not let the best be the enemy of the good.
For more on the ins and outs of the halachic prenuptial agreement, watch the full broadcast version of the Week in Review, and visit theprenup.org. If you'd like to support Sarah in her cause to collect the money she says her ex-husband owes her, go to the URL at the bottom of your screen. For the Jewish Channel, I'm Rebecca Honig-Friedman.
Finally, this week on Up Close, when new ideas come forward, we can have a hard time accepting them for the value they represent. In the case of Bitcoin, the virtual currency that's now worth billions of dollars, value is precisely the question. New York Times business reporter Nathaniel Popper digs under the surface to find out more in digital gold, Bitcoin, and the inside story of the misfits and millionaires trying to reinvent money. And then, in a world increasingly driven by popular discussion, the possibility of popular outrage at scientific discovery has the ability to shut down discussions and ruin careers. Northwestern University professor Alice Dreger shares her findings in Galileo's Middle Finger, Heretics, Activists, and the Search for Justice in Science. Here are some of the highlights from my interview with Alice Dreger. Justice in science. Why is it missing? What do we need to do to get there?
Well, I think what we're looking at right now is a situation where science is under attack from lots of different points of view. And the argument I make in the book is not that social justice is bad, but rather that we're in a situation where social justice movements really need to be founded in science because you need reality-based social justice. So I try to examine in the book what happens when social justice activists attack scientists, not because they have the facts wrong, but because they have an idea that is politically unpalatable.
And you come up with this idea of the Galilean personality. Right. What is the Galilean personality?
It's somebody like Galileo who is kind of stubborn and self-righteous, but also determined to find out what's really true about the world, and somebody who believes that the truth will save them, even when in fact everything's closing in on them in terms of people being angry and upset and trying to shut them down. And I trace through the book a bunch of different scientists who sort of have this personality and push and push and push, even though they're in a lot of trouble. And
what's also important is that frequently the attacks that you're talking about are not about the data and are not about the data collection. It's a bank shot to try to diminish someone's character and therefore, hope that people ignore the data.
That's very true, and one of the things that happens in the media very frequently is these stories get into the media and there's sort of a standard story to be told. And even though it's not that standard story, it gets fit into that standard story of these are the good guys, these are the bad guys, everybody parts, the right knows which way they're supposed to go, the left knows which way they're supposed to go. And when you start to dig into it, in fact, it's always much more complicated. But a lot of people don't go back to the scientists' own work. What they do is they just read these columns that say this person said this terrible thing, and they believe that that person said that. And the attacks go on and on and on like a telephone game and get away from us, where it's very difficult to bring people back and say, hey, this is what actually happened.
What strikes me also is that in many of these cases, you've got partial truths. and you've got partial victories. And so again, you go back to this fellow Napoleon Chagnon, where he was defamed, I guess, in one very large anthropology association, and his work was challenged. But then there were revisions to that decision, and then there were other organizations that had things to say, and other published works coming out against it. And ultimately, we're left really just needing to dig deeply and weigh a lot of varied things. But it's hard to do that. It's hard to ask a lot of people to do that.
It is hard to do it, and part of the problem is as the economic pressures on journalism continue, that's a role that journalists used to play. They used to really help us figure out, sort out what went where, who said what really happened. And part of what we're seeing now is academics starting to take on more of that role, because that role has been lost to us in terms of journalism. And we do need help trying to figure it out. And I think it's one of the roles historians like myself can play, where historians can take a long view and try to figure out, well, what really happened here, and add some subtlety to the story and try to figure out what really occurred, rather than just having this sort of yelling back and forth that seems to occur largely in the internet age.
You can see the full episode of Up Close on the Jewish Channel on cable. You can also listen to the full audio of Up Close as a podcast available on iTunes or in your favorite podcast player. That's all for this week. From all of us here at the Jewish Channel, be well. The Jewish Channel is available on cable: Time Warner Cable Channel 1640, IOFLM Channel 505, RCN Channel 268, Cox Cable Channel 1, Bright House Channel 330, Verizon Fios Channel 900, and on Comcast on the on-demand menu on premium channels. For more information, visit tjctv.com.